Welcome. My name is Olivia Mattis, and I represent the Sousa Mendes Foundation. And we have a beautiful program for you today about the very heartwarming story of the recovery of a masterpiece of art history known as The Lady in Gold, a portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. And we have the author herself of this best-selling book, who's joining us today from London. So Anne-Marie O'Connor is the author of this book, as I mentioned, which is the true story that inspired the feature film Woman in Gold starring Helen, Mirren, and Ryan Reynolds. Anne-Marie is a veteran journalist and war correspondent who has reported for the Miami Herald, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and other media. Her story on Maria Altmann's effort to recover her artwork appeared in the Los Angeles Times Magazine in 2001. Anne-Marie O'Connor attended Vassar and the San Francisco Art Institute, and she graduated from UC Berkeley, where she and her fellow students created an award-winning documentary on the repression of artists after the 1973 military coup in Chile. And Anne-Marie O'Connor joins us today from London, where she lives. So Anne-Marie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor for me. It's such an honor to share this experience. This was an amazing journey for me. This is a story of art and justice, of a painting that for many years was a beautiful enigma, like the Mona Lisa. But for me, it was an LA story. I was an LA Times reporter, and one day I read a community news item about a local woman. The Nazis had stolen a painting of her aunt. It wasn't locked away in a mysterious castle. It was in Austria's National Museum. Reading this, to me, it seemed like a lost cause. In those days, no one got back stolen art, but I looked at the tiny image and said, that painting? It was one of the most famous paintings in the world, one of Gustav Klimt's portraits of Viennese society women. So I called the operator and I got the number of Maria Altmann. And soon I was sitting in the living room of Maria and drinking Viennese coffee with lots and lots of whipped cream, which seemed to be a longevity secret for Viennese centenarians. Maria was telling me about her Aunt Adele, a woman of today living in the world of yesterday. According to Maria, the women painted by Klimt were not just society women. They were intellectuals, patrons. Her aunt might have even had a thing with Klimt. And according to Maria, the women in Klimt's famous portraits were Jewish. I had never heard this in art history. But it seemed very unlikely to me that Maria could move this legal case out of her kitchen. But Maria was very charismatic, possibly one of the most charming people on earth. With Maria, everything was my love, my darling. Her photo album was filled with dreamy images that looked like they came from a lost world. The photos had a sort of Downton Abbey nostalgia, like her stories. I found it all very seductive somehow. So I asked her, do you have a lawyer? And she said, Randy, I've known him since he was in diapers. So with that recommendation, I drove over to Randy's office, which was right nearby at Wilshire and Bundy. And Randy looked like he just graduated from college. I did a story for the LA Times on it, but no one seemed to think this case would go anywhere. But it did. And as the case moved forward in US courts, we learned more about Gustav Klimt and the enigmatic women in his paintings. The story began 100 years before with a young woman named Adele Bauer, one of the Jewish women whose portraits would someday be called Klimt's women. Here on the left, Adele is 16, reading a poem. Do you recognize me? Do you know who I am? Modernism was being born in Vienna, and people were already wondering who they were, rather than who other people wanted them to be. Adele wanted to join the world of artists and intellectuals in Vienna. Here in the photo on the right, she has a cigarette in her hand down below. Conventional girls did not smoke cigarettes in turn of the century Vienna. By then, Adele had probably already met Gustav Klimt, the very handsome maverick star of the arts world in Vienna. There has been a lot of speculation on their relationship. Art historians have noted how much Adele resembles Klimt's sensual painting of Judith. Klimt had also painted other prominent Jewish women in Adele's circle. The sister, Margaret, of philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, the daughter of a prominent Viennese doctor, and on the right, Serena Lederer, a cousin of Joseph Pulitzer, the American newspaperman. These were forward-minded women who supported Klimt and other modernists in Vienna. In 1907, Klimt unveiled his gold portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. After 3 years together in his studio, the painting was an instant sensation, and it immediately cemented Adele's position in the Viennese intelligentsia. At the same time he was painting Adele, Klimt was working on his iconic portrait, The Kiss, and many people have noted the resemblance to Adele of the woman in The Kiss. Klimt died young of the Spanish flu in 1918. By then, Adele was an established member of Vienna's arts world. She also died young at 43 in 1925. Adele's husband, Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer, turned Adele's room into a shrine with her Klimt paintings. It was his room of remembrance. He planned to donate the Klimt works to Vienna's Belvedere Arts Museum after his death. Then life moved on for the Bloch-Bauers. Adele's beautiful young niece, Maria, married an aspiring opera singer, Fritz Altmann. They had a beautiful honeymoon together in Europe. And right after they got back to Vienna, Hitler marched in. Maria and her family were shocked. People cheered and threw flowers at Hitler. The Nazis quickly went after Jewish families and businesses. These were people who loved Vienna, major philanthropists who funded many of the hospitals and social welfare projects in Vienna. They loved Vienna and they thought Vienna loved them back. Reinhard Heydrich moved into Ferdinand and Adele's Czech castle while he was planning the final solution. One day he left the castle and he was assassinated on the road. Meanwhile in Vienna, a Nazi lawyer, Erich Führer, went to Jewish homes and helped the Nazis identify valuables and artworks, while he was pretending to be working representing the interests of the Jewish families. The former leader of Hitler Youth, Baldur von Schirach, became Vienna's Nazi governor. He was very interested in the Jewish art collections, and he helped steal the paintings. He went house to house. Baldur von Schirach planned a huge 1943 show of Klimt paintings that is still the biggest Klimt show ever. He took away the names of the Jewish women in Klimt's portraits and gave them anonymous identities like woman with Chinese wallpaper. The Nazis called the stolen gold portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer Dame in Gold, the Lady in Gold. After the war, the stolen art was piled in depots across Europe. Allied forces gave the stolen paintings back to the governments and the museums. When Jewish families came to try to recover their art, they were told it had been donated to the museums. In reality, people like Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer had been trying to get their paintings back. He was still trying when he died at the end of the war. Years went by, and a young Viennese journalist, Hubertus Czernin, discovered the truth about all the stolen paintings in the Vienna archives. His stories made a scandal and prompted Austria to pass the 1998 art restitution law. Maria Altmann heard about this law and got in touch with Hubertus Czernin and began her legal battle with Randy. As Maria's case moved forward, an art show opened in Vienna called Klimt's Women. It had all the Nazi looted paintings held by the Belvedere Museum. When it opened, heirs immediately stepped forward to claim this painting that was used as the poster. The stolen Klimt portraits of Adele were in very prominent positions in the show. A Vienna journalist compared the museum to a gangster mall parading around with the jewelry of the bloodied victims. This was a huge scandal, and it helped Maria's case immensely. Maria and Randy won a Supreme Court ruling in 2004 over the right to hear their case in US courts. So Austria offered to put together a legal panel to settle the case. In 2006, the panel decided to restitute the paintings to Maria Altmann and the other Bloch-Bauer heirs. To the Austrians, this was a huge shock. They were losing their Austrian Mona Lisa. Posters went up all over the city of Vienna saying, "Ciao Adele, ciao Adele," at bus stops everywhere, all over Vienna. But in 2012, Austria issued its first Klimt commemorative coin. One side had the face of Klimt. The other side had the face of Adele. Adele is still a symbol of Austria, but she is a deeper symbol. Her story is known, and it ain't the sound of music. A great work of art can stand alone, but this painting had a legend that was still untold. Now the world knew the true identities of Klimt's women. This wasn't just a restitution of art. This was a restitution of history. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Boy, what incredible research you did for your book, and what a beautiful presentation you've just given us.
What an incredible experience it was.
So right now we're going to see a little video clip of Randy Schoenberg, the lawyer. This was a clip that was made for his law school, the University of Southern California. It's just a little three-minute clip that tells the story from his point of view. And then Anne-Marie, I'd love to get your reaction to the clip after we show it.
I went to law school right out of college, mainly as a default. I couldn't really do anything else. I had majored in math, but I really wasn't good enough to go on to graduate school. And my father was a judge, and I thought, okay, law might be a good thing to try out. So that's why I came to USC. It was fun for me also because at that time my grandfather's archives were here at USC. The Arnold Schoenberg Institute was here. My grandfather Arnold Schoenberg fled the Nazis in 1933, and he spent one winter in Boston and froze to death and decided to come out to California. So in 1934 he came out here, and his first job was teaching at USC. I was working in a firm downtown doing securities litigation, and I got a call from my grandmother's closest friend, Maria Altmann. And I knew Maria. She had been a very good family friend. She knew my mom since my mom was born, and she was always around. And so she called me up and said, "Could you help me? I got a call from Austria, and there's some new law, and my family had these paintings, and I think there's something going on." And she told me this story about how the Nazis had taken these paintings from her uncle and that the family had never recovered them. And so immediately I was hooked, and we went together on a long 8-year journey. When I was in the Supreme Court with Maria, actually, in 2004, that day she was on the cover of the USA Today. And I said to Maria, I said, win or lose, everybody thought we were going to lose, but I said, win or lose, no matter what, your story is being told, right? It's on the cover of the newspaper. There's going to be a Supreme Court decision that lasts forever. Everybody's going to know what happened to you. And for me and for Maria, that was our motivation, telling the story. And so now to have it as a major motion picture with Helen Mirren and Ryan Reynolds and Katie Holmes, and have millions of people hear her story, it really is is the icing on the cake. It's a great fulfillment of a dream that Maria had, which was to let people know about what happened to her family, what happened to families like mine, also victims of the Nazis, and these amazing paintings. Everything worked out miraculously, but all I can say is you have to follow your own instincts. You have to do what you think is right, and you have to be prepared to be able to do that. So I was very fortunate to have a great background that I got at USC Law School, and also as an associate at the firms I had worked at, so that when Maria Altmann came to me and I had this great opportunity, I was ready to take it, and I took it. After the case ended, there were actually a group of students here at UC Law School who went to the deans and said, why don't you ask Randy Schoenberg to come and teach an art law course? So I was asked to come back to my alma mater and teach, and there's no greater honor than that. It's been a lot of work for me to come back and teach, but it's been very rewarding.
Anne-Marie, what would you like to say in response to that video?
Well, Randy really rolled the dice on this case. And, I was, at the time, the LA Times wasn't really covering it that much, and they actually didn't cover the Supreme Court argument that he made. I did a story out of Los Angeles, but they didn't send anybody to go cover it. People didn't think this was going to win. I heard comments from legal analysts that I quoted, and they said things like, oh, he's really swimming upstream on this. And it was, a cause célèbre in Los Angeles, but it was viewed as kind of an unwinnable case. And how would you get the paintings back, even if Austria lost? So it was really a testimony to Maria and her loyalty, because Randy stuck to the case, and Maria stuck with Randy and dismissed any suggestion that she should replace him at some point with a more seasoned, older attorney. And I think they had a wonderful time in spite of all the obstacles. For the reasons he said, they were able to tell the story, and it really worked out for them.
So questions are starting to come into the chat box. I do encourage people to continue putting their questions into the chat box. Let me start asking some of them. So Anne-Marie, somebody asks about the artwork. Well, the question is this: there's so much art that has not been returned. How much Nazi looted art has been returned? How much is still hanging in museums or private collections? Thank you. So if you could give a sense for the scale and what we're dealing with. Okay,
so 20% of the art in Europe was stolen by the Nazis. So you can imagine it took so long to get these restitutions going, and a lot of them happened as a result of this case. But there are still a couple 100,000 pieces outstanding. Now, what happens now is the pieces come up for auction by anonymous owners. And then if an heir steps forward, and this has happened many times, then they just withdraw them from the auctions. So there are still restitutions happening. And if they go to an auction, say in the United States, and someone makes a claim, they have a very good chance of getting some type of settlement. But if they come up in Europe, Europeans are still protected by the argument that they bought the art in good faith. So they simply withdraw it from the auction, and it goes back into anonymity.
So people are asking, where is this painting today? So why don't you explain where it is and how it's not there?
The portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer was sold to the Neue Gallery in New York, and it was sold with a commitment that it would always be on public display. So anyone can see it in New York City at the Neue Gallery. The second portrait of Adele that we didn't see was bought by Oprah Winfrey, and it is also on public display quite a bit.
And what would be your advice for someone perhaps in our audience whose family had their art collection looted? What should they do?
Well, I would say that it really depends on the country, but in most of the countries of Europe now, they have entities that are hearing some of these things and assisting people. And I would contact someone there, but I would also there are a number of art restitution organizations now and registries in the United States. And I would also work with some of them before contacting a lawyer. In many cases, they can recommend a lawyer. And we can post some of those organizations later on if you want.
So what's the case in Austria today? The situation has drastically changed, hasn't it, in terms of the official government policy on restitution of art?
Well, Austria was one of the laggards in this and one of the worst when I started this. But since then, it's become it's gone to the forefront of restitution. And the Belvedere Museum alone has restituted 15 major Klimt works that would be considered patrimony if they hadn't been looted by the Nazis. And a lot of these works were worth 20, 30, $50 million, and they have given them back. Now, that was the fair thing to do because of the circumstances in which these were all stolen. So after my book came out, there were some of the cases in the book that had not been solved. I got some emails from people who were investigating some of the cases asking me if I had any notes, longer notes, which I did on some of the paintings. And in at least one case, a major work of art was restituted as a result of it. So it's still a process that's ongoing. And the heirs a lot of the principal heirs are passing on now, but their heirs are not leaving these cases. The cases can still be waged by their children and grandchildren.
So there's some questions about this concept of buying a piece of stolen art in good faith. So the question is, how is that even a legal argument? But I think that has something to do with the statute of limitations, doesn't it?
Well, there are different statutes of limitations in Europe, but the principle in good faith has been a huge obstacle to restitution in Europe. Really, according to the Washington principles, any piece of art that had a provenance that had changed hands between 1933 and 1948, you can't say that piece of art was bought in good faith. And people check into the provenances of art when they buy it. So usually they know. So when I hear people saying, oh, well, we didn't know, we bought it in good faith, I'm very skeptical of that, because a lot of times what they bought was a discounted piece of art that was, literally a steal, because they were willing to overlook these inconsistencies, and a lot of people were willing to overlook them. Less so now, it seems like more of a risk, but that is the argument that is used in Europe, and it does hold up in court.
So there's a question about Hubertus Czernin. So I'm wondering if you can just give us a little fuller picture of who he is, what his motivation was, what his role was in the research for your own book, and what his role was in the recovery of this case, the successful conclusion of this case.
Well, Hubertus was an investigative journalist, and he had, prior to this, he had done many investigations, including one about top clergymen and sex abuse in Vienna. And that was a huge scandal, and people had to resign. So he was one of the first reporters into the clergy of sexual abuse of the Catholic Church. So he had a long track record in all different kinds of investigative reporting. Now, he had a very serious illness, an orphan illness, and he decided to go to writing books and investigating Nazi art theft because he thought it would be more accommodating to his disability. When I met Hubertus, I thought he was going to be my best friend and be with me the whole time I wrote the book. But I met him when I was just starting the book, and he passed away suddenly a short time after I met him of his illness. So that was very sad. He was a really charming person. And one of the things he didn't tell me when we got to know each other and spent time together was that his father had been a major Nazi Aryanizer. And I also met with Hubertus's brother, who is an award-winning poet in Europe. And he also didn't mention this to me, but I found his father and his role in some out-of-print books. And he had been one of the major Aryanizers of Jewish possessions in Austria. Now, it's hard for me to imagine that Hubertus didn't know all the details of this, but he may not have, because after the war, there was just a curtain over all of these things, and people didn't discuss these things even with their own children, and it was considered impolite in Austrian society to discuss these things. And when Hubertus's research started to come out in the press, people were very upset at him because he was a count. He was one of the nobility, and people in his family were very upset at him, but it didn't come out in the papers. So it's possible that this information had been buried for decades, but I did find it and I put it in the book. So he must have known there was something there, but maybe he didn't know everything. And the everything was very big. Hubertus heard rumors from people, and he started to look in the archives. Now, Hubertus had a big advantage in this. He was from an extremely prominent, big Viennese family with many children, many cousins, many branches of his family. One of the women in his family worked in one of the archives, and it was one of the key archives. And she would have had the time to track down everything. She also had a father who was a major player in Nazi Vienna. And so that, he looked in the archives and all this stuff was there. And this is why I say Viennese officials would have had to have known in many cases, because the Nazis were very systematic record keepers, and they kept records of everything. And in, all these records were available, but the archives were locked. And one of the changes of the 1998 art restitution law were to open the archives somewhat, but not completely. So there was still a lot of furtive subterfuge. But he found it.
So can you tell a little bit about this concept that the Nazis put forward of degenerate art, degenerate music, and why was Klimt not included in that category? Why was he prized by the Nazis rather than dismissed by them?
Well, that's a really good question. Most modern artists that we know of now were declared degenerate artists, and including many of Gustav Klimt's friends and fellow modernists from turn of the century Vienna. Now, Klimt should have really been declared a degenerate. Even his erotic drawings alone, he had these very explicit erotic drawings that people had framed all over Vienna. I've seen some of them. And so, and his works would have been considered degenerate if they had been painted by another artist. But Baldur von Schirach was a huge fan of Klimt, and he wanted an art show under the Nazi auspices that represented Austrian art. So Baldur von Schirach kind of reinvented Klimt a little bit as sort of a Nazi Übermensch. He was very masculine. He had many women. His physique was very powerful. So he was sort of spun in this 1943 show as sort of like a Nazi Übermensch. And his portraits were such classic Viennese portraits. When all this news came out, a lot of Viennese people were very shocked, even in modern times, but there were classic portraits even then. And he was very eager to show them, even to the point of counterfeiting their Jewish identities and risking that they would be discovered. So it was a conspiracy of silence, because no one in Berlin knew, but Baldur von Schirach knew.
So is he the one, in fact, who attributed the generic title of Dame in Gold to the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer?
Well, that was in his show, yes, Dame in Gold. So that's what he called that portrait. And all the other portraits were also renamed with very descriptive titles. So, woman with flowers in the background, things like that. So that's how he handled that.
So in
Which
fact,
got him in trouble later on, actually. He did get in trouble eventually and fell out of favor with Hitler when he did a later art show, and some of this stuff was discovered.
but so when we refer to this painting as the Lady in Gold or the Woman in Gold, that's taking the Nazi title. It's sort of it's a charged term. So should we be using that as the title, or should we be calling it the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer?
Well, it's a toxic term. And the Nazis had many names for that portrait in all different shows. Woman in Gold with gold background, all these different titles. I would say now, I'm sure at the Neue Gallery, they call it Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer I, and the other portrait is Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer II. So she's no longer called the Lady in Gold, but it's a popular term, and it doesn't go away. But at the same time, even though it was created as a very toxic, genocidal movement, at the same time, it reclaims that term, and it reminds people of what happened. People learn and are aware of that, and it reminds them of what the Nazis did.
Are you able to speak about the different countries of Europe? If someone's family lived in France versus in Austria, is it easier to recover a work that was stolen in France? I mean, what is the situation? And are there particular museums that are terrible offenders where they have some of this Nazi stolen art still on their walls?
The big problem now is, according to the Washington Principles for Art Restitution, they were supposed to publish registries of all pieces of art that were acquired between 33 and 48 and give all of their provenance. And they're supposed to post them publicly. Now, they were very slow to do so. Museums are starting to do this. After Randy won this case, the Dutch immediately restituted 200 paintings that were the collection of Jacques Houdsticker that were collected personally by Hermann Göring. So this case did act as a catalyst, particularly for work that was in state-owned museums for restitution. So it did prompt people a little bit, just because they were facing a trial in the court of public opinion. And they saw that, Randy and Maria waged this for 8 years, and the world learned a lot of unflattering things about Austria. And they were looking at this as their possible future, so they gave some of this stuff back. Really, what is happening now is still, there's a little bit of subterfuge. In Paris, the Louvre director announced she was going to give back a painting because she found that it was looted art. I would speculate that probably people knew this, and it came to a point where they were willing to give it up rather than be outed publicly for this. But I think there are still works of art that have not been identified. It's less likely for pieces that have been identified not to be restituted now. Often they're making quiet deals now, where they make a deal with the heirs, or if it's put up for auction, they pay the heirs, but they also pay back the price to the collector who bought it. And, there's a lot of things that are happening quietly, but yes, there is still outstanding looted art.
So
and that's wrong.
Can you tell a little bit more about the Bloch-Bauers? For example, there's a question as to whether they knew the Aphrusi family that's described in the book, The Hare with the Amber Eyes. But in general, I know that the Bloch-Bauers knew a lot of famous people. So could you flesh out a little bit more who they were?
Yeah, the Bloch-Bauers were a very socially prominent family. This is one of the things that shocked Hubertus Czernin. Maria was friends with Hedy Lamarr, who was also a Jewish debutante at the time that Maria was a debutante. They knew Freud, they knew Gustav Mahler. Alma Mahler was Adele Bloch-Bauer's best friend. And so they were extremely prominent Viennese families. Yes.
And they knew Mark Twain, you said.
Mark Twain lived in Vienna for 2 years, and he knew the entire Viennese intelligentsia. One of his best friends in Vienna was Theodor Herzl. And Mark Twain had fun mocking anti-Semites in little feuilletons that he wrote for a Viennese newspaper, where Theodor Herzl was the editor of those little witty vignettes that they published in those days. So yeah, it was a very exciting time to be alive in Vienna.
So right now we're going to take a pause from our questions, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our 2 upcoming programs. We will have time for some questions after that, so do continue to put your questions into the chat box. So next week, we are featuring the story of the baseball player spy, Morris Moberg, who played for the Boston Red Sox and who was recruited during World War II by the US Office of Strategic Services to do a very dangerous and important mission on behalf of the US government. So we're showing a film called The Catcher Was a Spy, and we're featuring the best-selling author Nicholas Davidoff, who wrote the book on which the film was based. And then the week following, so that's next week, October 17th. The week following, October 24th, we're featuring the story of Anne Frank, but we're taking a little bit of a different turn to it. We're actually focusing on her rescuer, a woman named Miep Gies. Now, of course, everyone knows Anne Frank did not survive, but she was hidden and protected by Miep Gies for several years until the family was betrayed and discovered. And it was Miep Gies who rescued Anne Frank's diary. And along with Otto Frank, she brought Anne's personality and her words and her thoughts to all of us, to posterity. So we're going to be honoring Miep Gies. And on that program, we have we have 2 speakers. We have a speaker in England who started the Anne Frank Trust in England. And we have an American speaker who's a children's book author who wrote a beautiful, very delightful book on Miep Gies that we are offering for sale for those of you who are interested. That second program, the one on Miep Gies, is a free program, as today's is. Next week, we are requiring tickets. But tickets are by donation, and donation is whatever amount is comfortable for you. We do suggest the number of 18, which represents high or life. But if you can give more, that's wonderful, or less, that's fine too. Our paid programs do support our programs for the rest of the month, and we are grateful to you, and your contribution is tax deductible. So right now, we are going to show you the trailer for the film, The Catcher Was a Spy.
You're an unusual man, Mr. Berg. You speak 7 languages. You're an athlete. You're more than up to the physical requirements of the job.
What job?
It's
Since this war began, we have reason to believe the Germans are working on a fission bomb.
The scientist leading their atomic program is Werner Heisenberg. We must get to him and find out how close the Germans are to a bomb.
Welcome to the OSS, Mr. Berg. Millions of lives at stake. A 5% chance of losing the war to a weapon like this, you do what has to be done. You can't allow yourself to be captured.
You know that I love you.
You brought me here to say goodbye?
I'll be back. Is this your first job? I've never killed a man, if that's what you mean. It's not as hard as you might think.
I don't know what God you believe in, Berg, if any. But I'll be asking mine to keep an eye on you.
What if Heisenberg's on our side? Are you hoping he'll defect?
If it comes down to it, are you going to be able to kill him? There may be one moment that tells you whether the Germans have been bombed. One moment when you'll learn all you need to know.
We'll move.
So now back to audience questions. So here's a question, which is, can you shed any light on the role of Stuart Eisenstadt in developing the Washington Principles and their importance?
Yeah, Stuart Eisenstadt and Randy worked together on the negotiations for the Claims Resolution Tribunal. I'm not completely versed on Stuart Eisenstadt's role, but I'm sure he had a deep role in the Washington Principles.
And what does that mean, the Washington Principles?
The Washington Principles on Art Restitution were a 1998 commitment that countries agreed to, without really abiding by, actually, in the end, as I've just said, to make a registry of art that with questionable provenance, and to make this public. So every country was supposed to make a public registry online, which they were very slow to do, and they were just starting to do when I started working on this book. But there are some now, and they're trying to be better. But the commitment was to be transparent about works acquired between 1933 and 1948 if they changed hands. So that would have been a time when works could have been looted by the Nazis. And everybody agreed to do this, but they're still trying to do it.
So what are you working on now?
Now I'm working with an agent on another book that's an art history drama that involves also war and art, and kind of a search for the truth, and a famous work of art. So I'll have more about that soon.
Great. And there is a figure in your book where there's an effort being made to honor this person as a Holocaust rescuer, righteous among the nations. Can you speak a little bit about that person and the effort being made?
Yes, I'm really excited about this. A ship captain who allowed 400 Jewish refugees at Bayonne, when the Nazis were very near, allowed these refugees to board his ship and escape the Nazis in 1941 to Lisbon. Now, when I heard about him from one of the main people I was interviewing for the book, and he had actually taken this ship. And this was a very distinguished scientist, and it had to be true. I did find verification in a book that was enough to keep it in the book, but I could never find his name. And this summer, the French Resistance Foundation sent me his file, and his name was René John Moreau. And it's very exciting to me that they might honor him. Of course, he's been dead for a long time. some of the refugees who got on the ship had been helped by a famous Portuguese diplomat, Sousa Mendes. So my book is part of the documentation in Jerusalem for this award, which I hope he gets. And I'm very excited. It's never too late to honor a righteous act, I think.
And the person leading the charge is herself related to the Zuckerkandl family, right? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, the person who is leading this is a novelist in Israel called Ora Ahimir, and she is a relative of Berta Zuckerkandl, and a very big family in Vienna that were art collectors, intellectuals, scientists. And Ora has just written a novel that's going to be published in Israel about the Zuckerkandl family.
So one final question, which is, do you know whatever happened to Adele's favorite necklace?
Apparently, the necklace went to Goring's actress wife. That's what they said. It has never been found. You know, a lot of this stuff that was stolen was never seen again. So if it was really given to Emmy Goring, probably some heir has it somewhere. It's just floating around somewhere, like a lot of this art still is floating around. Somebody knows, but they're not telling.
So Anne-Marie, do you have some final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, I guess my final thought would be, if you have a claim or a principle, don't give up, push it forward. I was always very inspired by Maria at her age doing what she did. I felt like, wow, this is like the greatest blessing to someone who's elderly, to have this incredible mission to get you up in the morning. And I hope I have one. I think I should look for one. But I just think it was like such a huge enrichment to her life to, at what a lot of people would consider retirement or the end of their lives, to have something that they believe in so much that is driving them forward. I think this was a beautiful blessing and a beautiful gift.
Well, thank you for the beautiful blessing and the beautiful gift of your book and your presentation today. And I'm so grateful to have met you and to call you a friend. So
Thank you. Myself too.
Thanks to our large audience who attended today. It was a nice big crowd. And certainly my deep thanks to you, Anne-Marie. And so we're going to close a little before the end of the hour. So see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.